In this video, we're going to cover what are the actual signs of facial aging. It sounds like a simple question, but you may be surprised how little you knew about actually what makes us look old. So stay watching until the end, and hopefully you'll know as much as us plastic surgeons. So if you're new to the channel, then welcome. If you've been to the channel before, then welcome back. Today we're going to talk about an interesting topic which is very often misunderstood, namely facial aging. Now, the reason why I'm raising this as a topic today is because we all know whether somebody looks old or not, but we couldn't necessarily specifically state what it is that makes them look old. What part of their face or skin is it that makes them look 60 or 70 rather than 20 or 30? In this video, we're going to discuss all the elements of facial aging, some of which you will of course know, and some of which will be a surprise to you. So please stay tuned till the end. We will have a summary of all of the elements of facial aging. So facial aging, as you can imagine, is a key focus for all plastic surgery. It is a $1 trillion business when you think about all of the different interests. And in this, we of course include plastic surgery and all of the specialties included within that. But we also include the hair and beauty industry, makeup, but also things like face creams, things like Instagram, where people alter their facial appearance to look fresher or younger or to exemplify certain elements of their features. Dentition and dental work is also part of the facial aging spectrum. And so as you can imagine, with all of these different interests, it's very important to consider what actually facial aging is made up of. Facial aging is a phenomenon that affects us throughout life. Our facial structure changes, and the classic signs of this change are used to judge somebody's appearance and their age, and by inference, many other things about them. In the early phases of life, facial maturing is about growth. From fetus to childhood, it's about growing a full head of hair, growing your second set of teeth, filling out your face, losing the baby fat. From childhood to teenage, it's going through spots and acne. It's going through changes in your hair thickness. It's going through puberty, which involves facial hair for men. And then as we plastic surgeons come into play, it is about the changes from teenage through to very old age. And it's these specifically I'm going to discuss today, because this is what I target in my line of work, but also what is targeted by many, many aspects of health and beauty throughout the world every single day. So to begin with, we're going to discuss the skin. The skin is an extremely key part of the facial aging process. It undergoes many changes throughout life. But as we mentioned, the changes from child to teenager, including spots, can leave lifelong marks in the skin, especially for people with pitting acne. Sun exposure as children or as teenagers can have impacts on later life, creating signs of sun damage when we're older, but also precipitating early wrinkles and thinning of the skin. Between the ages of 40 and 70, the skin matrix, which is made up of skin cells, but also a number of extracellular proteins, which hold the cells of the skin together, almost like mortar holding a brick wall together. These elements of extracellular matrix become thinner. We lose proteins like hyaluronic acid. We lose or break the bonds in our elastin, making the skin less elastic. We lose volume in terms of dermatan, which is a skin protein, and all of these changes lead to the skin becoming noticeably thinner. I liken this process to our skin turning from a denim jacket, which is very hard to crease no matter how long you leave it on the bedroom floor, through a cotton shirt, to a linen shirt, and then ultimately in our 60s, 70s or 80s, after significant aging processes, our skin resembles a silk shirt, which will crease extremely easily, and the creases will be very hard to remove. This is analogous to the process of the skin thinning and losing its elasticity, and therefore creasing much more easily. In fact, we have a classification for skin creases numbered 1 to 4. Number one being the type of creases you see in children or young adults, which completely disappear after stopping facial movement, all the way to skin creases type 4, which essentially are creases which do not change irrespective of facial movement. Classically, these are represented by the very old face, with wrinkles throughout the face, even when they're not smiling or animating. On top of this, the skin ages in other ways. We demonstrate age spots or sunspots due to the sun exposure that we described earlier. We also develop things like keratosis, which are a sign of skin senility. What I mean by that is the skin becomes older and less able to repair itself. We see things like spider nevi, which are little vascular lesions. We see blotching. We see pigment changes where the skin can become variegated in conditions like vitiligo, but also in the absence of specific skin conditions like that. We also see things like moles, either pigmented or non-pigmented. And again, in no small way due to sun exposure, we see things like skin cancer amongst the older age group. So in summary, when we look at somebody's skin, we can have a pretty good idea of how old they are. A number of techniques are used to target a number of these changes, which I will discuss in a future video. The next thing I want to discuss is bony changes of the facial skeleton, which have a profound effect on facial aging and which are often underappreciated. The facial skeleton changes significantly from embryonic, where it is very pliable, through toddler to childhood, where the fusion plates tend to fuse, creating a more fixed bony skeleton. By the time we reach late teenage, our bony skeleton has fused, although there is still a little bit of growing left to do. As men get older, they have a progressive bossing of the skull, which gives them heavier eyebrows and a thicker set forehead. Ladies tend to have a mild elongation of the mandible, creating more delicacy to their face. The key considerations of aging come in the 30s to 50s in the first instance. What we see is a noticeable change in the diameter of the orbit. This change can either be in vertical height, slightly less commonly in transverse height, and can be in either direction. We also see changes to the maxilla, which is the upper jawbone. The maxilla becomes shorter and slightly anteriorly tilted. The piriform fossa, which is the hole in the skull through which we breathe through our nose, also becomes wider and taller. The maxilla that bears the teeth also becomes shorter, giving a greater show of the teeth beyond the gums. The same happens to the mandible, where the mandible becomes a little thinner. The angle of the mandible becomes more acute, and the ability for the mandible and maxilla to hold onto teeth becomes compromised in our 70s, 80s, and 90s. The next layer we're going to consider is the facial muscles. The facial muscles also age, as do the soft tissue compartments of the face. Starting at the temples become hollow as the temporalis muscle, which is one of the muscles associated with chewing, becomes weaker and thinner. This gives us hollowing of the temples and a slimmer upper third of the face. This hollowing may also be partly responsible for crow's feet lines around the eyes, as the muscle overlying the hollow temple now has less tightness, as does the skin overlying that. Due to the expansion of the orbits, the soft tissue structures of the lower forehead tend to fall down into the hole where they used to have support by the orbital rim. The orbital rim now, as it leaves them unsupported, what we often see is the soft tissues of the upper eyelid falling down into the hole, creating folds of skin. We also see a fat compartment called the roof fat, which sits just to the lateral aspect of the eyebrow. This can also fall into the hole, creating that heavy roll that we sometimes see, especially in patients with thicker, oily skin. In severe cases, and specifically in men, when the orbital rim gets wider and taller, even the eyebrow can fall into the hole, giving us heavy brow or brow ptosis. Another manifestation of the orbit getting larger is the orbital septum. This is essentially a piece of cling film which covers all of the contents of the orbit, i.e. the eyeball and the fatty compartments and the muscles that move the eye. As the orbital rim expands, the orbital septum gets stretched. Furthermore, it gets weaker over time, just like the skin gets thinner over time. When the orbital septum becomes stretched, the contents of the orbit find it easier to lean against it and bulge forward, which is what we see in lower eyelid bags and lower eyelid aging. This can be seen in many patients in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, where You see sometimes 3 separate bulges in the lower eyelid, which is herniating fat from inside the eye through the orbital septum, leaning against the overlying skin and muscle. Furthermore, as the maxilla shortens and rotates posteriorly, a structure called the orbital malar ligament can fall laterally. As it does so, the cheek falls away from the lower eyelid, giving us a classic tear trough deformity. The cheek also has less maxilla to sit on top of, so almost like the Salvador Dali painting, the cheek slides off the table. This is further precipitated by the maxilla becoming more tilted as well as shorter. Moving down the face, we see this cheek fall be manifested as nasolabial lines. This is the cheek as it descends down the face, creating heaviness along the fixed point of ligamentous attachment laterally to the corners of the mouth. This heaviness gives an impression of aging. Furthermore, the cheek fall creates marionette lines. These are similar lines of heaviness below the corners of the mouth, which are again caused by the cheek sliding down the face, no longer supported in front of the maxilla. Change in the volume of the fat compartments of the face, including the malar fat pad, either increase but usually decrease, and a loss of skin elasticity, as we described before, all precipitate this particular problem. Considering the mouth, there are a number of aging changes around the mouth. As the perioral skin ages, it becomes finer and more wrinkly, so pursing of the lips creates a more wrinkly appearance. Some people call these smoker's lines, as sun and smoke damage can cause this skin to become thinner sooner, but it happens in all patients over the age of probably 50 to 60. We also see that the muscle of the lips, the orbicularis oris, becomes a little weak, and so the lips deflate slightly. Furthermore, the fatty layer covering the lips just under the mucosa becomes a little thinner, so the lips become overall thinner and again somewhat deflated. As the mandible and maxilla lose vertical height, the teeth have less support for the roots. This demonstrates both in more teeth on show when we smile, which again is contributed to by loss of lip volume, but also the progression of gum disease as we get older is partly due to this, but also due to using our teeth to eat, and our teeth essentially look longer in our mouths the older we get. All of these changes are further precipitated by loss of muscle tone, as our arms, shoulders, abdomen all become a little saggy due to the underlying muscle tone becoming weaker and the underlying muscle volume becoming less. The same happens for the muscles of our face, especially around the mouth, which is very densely populated with multiple different muscles. This can cause a weakening and a deflation of this area. Moving further down, the tip of the chin can become a little shorter as the mandible loses a little bit of vertical height. It may also lose a little anterior projection. This can be classically seen in the very old lady image, a face which is noticeably shorter, often with no teeth and a very rolled chin and bottom lip. This is all due to loss of vertical height of the bony skeleton. When we consider neck aging, we often see an increase in volumes of fat in the deep compartments of the neck. These fatty compartments can create weight and sagging. The overlying muscle, which we call the platysma, acts essentially like a hammock for these compartments. And the older we get and the less fit and active we become, this platysma muscle becomes weaker, saggier and stringier. We see this stringing often in celebrities. We see it in ourselves, but we also see loss of neck definition due to the sagging hammock, loss of cervicomental angle, which is further worsened by loss of projection of the chin. The loss of elasticity of the neck skin creates creping and aging of the neck. We also see herniation of some of the deep neck structures like the submandibular glands. We also see sagging of the floor of the mouth, which is manifested in heaviness in the digastrics, and the hyoid bone, which defines the root of the neck, can also inferiorly rotate and project slightly forward. All of these changes are demonstrated by a slightly sagging neck with poor definition, some new fatty weight, which overall detracts from the appearance of youth. One thing which many people mention to me is the development of jowls. Jowls, again, are a direct result of the structures of the mid and lower face descending so far down the face that the soft tissue compartments cross the jawline. Again, very similar to the Salvador Dali painting we showed before. As those fatty compartments cross the jawline, they create a volume and a loss of linearity across the jawline, which is a classic sign of facial aging. Ultimately, what you're left with is a face in the 80s or 90s, which has very few of the signs of youth. Needless to say, there is a huge amount of research, investment, time and money spent on doing our best to arrest or even reverse some of these signs of facial aging, and I will discuss each one of these in a future video. But for now, I wanted to give you a summary of what makes us look old and what signs to look for that are a giveaway that our face is aging. If you have any specific questions about facial aging, then please get in touch with me at Adam Goodwin Surgery. If you have any other suggestions for videos, then please let me know in the comments. If you are interested in videos on some of the pitfalls and lies associated with Botox application, then please click on the link below, or equally some of the lies associated with filler application, which can lead to dangerous outcomes, then again click on the link below. Please like and subscribe. Look forward to seeing you on the next video.